Grimdark. It's a term that's used a lot these days, but what does it mean? Hey Google, define Grimdark.
Fiction, especially fantasy fiction, characterized by disturbing, violent, or bleak subject matter and a dystopian setting.
Did you know that 40k is actually where the term Grimdark comes from? In fact, you can see it on every rulebook from 3rd edition right through to the new Leviathan box set. So where did all these thoughts of a dark future come from?
If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
But unlike this woman, our Stoney isn't easily shocked, and he set out to design some Grimdark models.
Ready to be picked up for a very reasonable price on Colts 3D.
A couple of test prints and a Royal Mail parcel later, the models were with me. So to paint them, I turned to John Blanche for inspiration. His ability to fill his illustrations with such dynamism and life, despite using a restricted colour palette associated with the Grimdark setting, is I think what makes so many of his illustrations stand out in people's minds and creates this real reference point for 40k today.
You've got mail.
So I use red ink, I use yellow ink and orange ink, and it built in layers and it really glows.
As Stoney's model designs had a touch of the Inquisition about them and a real cult feel, I wanted to reference some of John Blanche's lesser known sketches, and my aim would be to use these as a colour palette limited to beige, brown, red and black. So after a quick undercoat in Wraithbone, I began. I also stumbled across this unfortunately quite low res image by John Blanche, which really shows how he uses red to accent various pieces.
I don't know why I find red so satisfactory, but I do.
Off the back of this I decided for the kind of prism head guys I was going to put the red on the helmets, and then also some red on the cape. Before going into any of these models, when I'm using contrast paints as bases, I like to dry brush a nice light white over the Wraithbone just to add that extra little bit of contrast, and I'm trying out this new Army Painter brush today. So when you're dry brushing, always try and keep it nice and light, nice and dry. Some people use a dry palette, but I don't think you can beat the old thumb. So give it a dry brush, heavier on the top and the bottom pieces so it looks almost a bit like an OSL effect before applying any base layers. So now the base coat's on, we're going to start adding to the robes first because it's the lightest colour on the model. I'm going to water down some skeleton horde with a lot of contrast so that it runs nicely into the cracks, and I can slowly build it up step by step in a kind of ink painting style, trying to replicate that John Blanche look. In general, when using contrast, I always use the lighter colours on the deepest part of the model first. I think this makes it easier to correct mistakes because it's easier to put a dark contrast over a light than it is to go the other way around. Next up, skin tone, and for that I always use Guilliman flesh as a base. It goes on nicely and it helps you see what you're doing later on. Normally I use some Militarum green and a little bit of Magos if I've got rotting flesh, but those colours are out, not part of Blanchitsu. So I might mix in a touch of red on some of the grosser bits if there's scars or if there's rotting flesh anywhere. And that's skin tone done. As you can see on the servo head up here, I've had a little bit of red where it's kind of rotting into the speaker Stoney's horribly thrown into his jaw. It's time to move on to some of the browns and darker colours on the model. I think a lot of these models have a lot of metallic pieces, so for anything I'm going to go for a bronzy colour, I'll base it in a coat of wildwood. I really like that as a base to build up to brasses and bronzes, so you can see I've done that here on anything that's leather and anything that I want to be metal. If I want a more silvery metallic colour, I added in a little bit of black with the wildwood mix as the base, before going on next to reds. I find the contrast red goes on quite streaky over such a light undercoat, so I'm using corn red here as a base. So here's most of the major colours blocked out. Anything that's left, like that book, I'm going to go Gore Grunter if it's a kind of leathery colour, and then anything I want gold in the end, I'm going to base with snakebite leather. The next big question is, what do we do about this dog? I'm not quite sure exactly what species, but I guess in the future it doesn't really matter. I'm going to go with a kind of Rhodesian Ridgeback, which I'm going to do with Gore Grunter fur, blended into some lighter browns. Next I needed to tackle this pulpit, which I wanted to make it look like it was made of stone. Now I know some people do stuff with wet wipes and hairspray, and Stoney's got videos on dunking stuff where liquid paint is floating on top of water, but I'm going to try and paint it freehand. I'm going to start using some Apothecary White to add some shade to the recesses. I think this looks really good as a stone base. And then I'm going to add more darkness with a combination of Nuln Oil and Agrax Earth Shade. Nice and watered down and built up in layers. You can see I've also added grains in the stone by freehand drawing with the Agrax Earth Shade in layers. So here's how they're looking so far. Most of the coats are on, almost all of the white is now gone on all of the models, and I just need to think about next steps, highlights and bases. So I don't want to sound like that heretic Lorgar, but the most important thing in 40k is scripture, and for mine I use Corn Red and Wildwood. Corn Red firstly to put in those kind of fancy letters that you see in old books and old scripts. It doesn't even have to look too much like a letter, just use a nice smooth paint, a fine brush. And if you can just draw a box or a square, that's fine. If you can do a kind of capital F or S or something easy like that, go for that. It just breaks up the lines that we'll be putting on that show the actual text with the Wildwood in a second. So when doing the text, I really do find that contrast helps with this. It just flows easier and you don't end up with clumpy bits. So use this Wildwood, nice fine tip, and just drag it with a kind of slightly shaky hand so it doesn't look like a straight line, it's a squiggle, looks more lifelike and more like actual kind of rolling prose. And you can see how those red bits we did earlier break that up and make it a little bit less monotonous than if we just had solid lines one after the other. For the bases, I wanted to go with that yellow-brown earth that you see a lot on Blanchitsu artwork, and I think it contrasts the beige quite nicely if I stayed on the darker side of that. To achieve this, I'll base in Armageddon dunes, and then I'll go over the top of that in a nice thick layer of Gore Grunter fur, and then dry brush up to something like Tau Light Ochre. And here we are, the almost finished product. Make sure you paint your rims, guys, keep them nice and smooth. I'm really happy with how this has turned out. I think it's within the palette that I was aiming for, but I do want to make the robes a little bit darker and dirtier at the bottom, so I'll build up more shade on those. And it wouldn't be a guy with a club if there wasn't a little bit of gore on there, so to that I'm going to add some blood for the blood god. And I like to mix that with a little bit of Shyish purple because I find the red by itself is just too bright. And with that, they were done, ready to beat down some heretics. Or perhaps they are the heretics, but I guess that's always the question with the Inquisition. I really enjoy painting these models that Stoney made. They've got so much life and personality, and I'm happy with how it turned out. I think at the end of the day, I may have been able to go a bit grimier and a little bit darker, but for me who normally paints in cleans, this was quite dirty enough. I think there's a lot of presence about these, and they look scary despite being, in quotation marks, the good guys. So here's the full group in a more natural setting. If you've enjoyed this video, please do hit like and subscribe, and try checking out the Large Blast podcast, where me, the designer of these models, and another talk about Warhammer into the wee hours. You can also check out our Cults 3D for more models like this. May the Emperor protect.